So maybe start out and just give us a quick synopsis of the trajectory of your career. Like, you know, you start a patrolman, masters, like because it's linear, it makes sense, but how did it all start?
So I let's see, well, I grew up in a family of skiers, and both my parents were ski racers back in the 50s. And so, you know, right away when you're a little kid, they're dragging you out skiing on your wooden skis and all that crap. And then, you know, when I got to be 16, my dad was like, okay, you're 16. I've been paying for your skiing all this time. Now you get to start paying for your own skiing. And I was like, oh Christ, like this stuff's expensive. And there was a program at Lake Eldora ski area outside of Boulder for, they had just a pro patrol and then they had a junior ski patrol. And so I did the junior ski patrol with a couple of friends. And then when I turned 18, I turned pro and they had night skiing so I could go to college and still patrol. And I did that for a few years. And in part because I thought I wanted to go to medical school. I was doing an undergrad in biology, and the more I thought about medical school, the more I thought, I don't know about that. And also, the more I did all this medical work, because if you have a bar at your ski area and night skiing and a lot of man-made snow, you get to do a lot of medical work at night in the dark with people wrapped around trees and all that good stuff. So I was like, I don't know, I was just getting a lot more interested in the snow. And so I got a job working at Snow Basin when I was 20 out in Utah. And then I worked there for a few years. And while I was doing that, you know, I met the folks at the Forecast Center and got more interested in that kind of stuff. And then Snow Basin got bought by a guy who wasn't that wonderful a person, which was actually to my advantage, because I probably would have ski patrolled for a really long time, but he was compromising our safety by what he was having us do with control work. And so I quit there and came here and went to grad school. And then when I was in grad school, there was a person here on the forest who was taking an avalanche class from me, Kimberly Schlenker. And we went to Jimmy B's after the field day, and there was this bartender there named Doug who was serving us beer. No shit, there we were. And anyway, Kimberly was like, what would it take to start an avalanche center here? And I'm like, you know, very naive. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, I mean, I'm sure I could raise all the money for my salary. And she's like, well, I can come up with money for you for August, and then if you raise your salary, you can run the avalanche center next year. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that shouldn't be too bad. So, you know, I mean, Big Sky threw in money, Bridger threw in money, Gallatin County Search and Rescue threw in money, you know, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks threw in money from their snowmobile safety fund, and all of a sudden we had like the first year's funding. And but then I learned that like trying to do an avalanche center with one person covering essentially the same area that they cover now, like that was not really feasible. So it just sort of spun up from there. You know, we had Ron Johnson working with me part-time the second year, then full-time the next year. With my master's degree, I had gotten a grant that would also fund a PhD. So then I went back to work on my PhD, and Sam's dad, Alex, was coming and working for the Avalanche Center. And then when I was during my fall semesters, because I'd come back here in the spring, and Doug did too. And yeah, and then I got my PhD and ended up helping getting the National Avalanche Center started, and actually getting to do a lot more research, which was what I really wanted to do until my boss then retired, and suddenly I was stuck doing admin for the last 8 years.
Any burning questions? Otherwise, I'll keep asking.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I've noticed over the years that you have a very fine fine-tuned sense of how to take technical information and make it readily digestible for all of us, which I have very much appreciated. Was there a point in your career or your life where you said, I got to be able to talk to people about this, or is it just a natural ability?
You know, I think I sort of think that a lot of it came from actually doing work in the snow with other people doing work in the snow. So then when I was spinning myself up in terms of learning more and more about the science, like I always wanted to keep it grounded. So I was always talking to all these other people that were in the snow all the time, because I'm like, does this really make sense? Like, what have you seen? And blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, it was always just a matter of thinking, well, you know, here I am right now, but what would Karl in, 1983, like, how would I have communicated this to him? And so, and then it's also very convenient to have good bullshit meters around. And Doug has been that for me a lot. Like I'll be like, Chabot, you gotta listen to this talk, and then I'll give him the talk, and he's like, oh God, you're gonna have to lose like those 4 slides. And I look at it and I think about it and I think, yeah, I wouldn't have, when I was ski patrolling, those wouldn't have helped me at all. So I'll flush those out, so that's been helpful too. And then just talking to, people at National Avalanche School and our patrol meetings and all that, like it's always super helpful. And everybody, whether it's the snow safety people or ski patrollers or everybody, that they'll always have questions or ask you to explain something. And I always love doing that because that challenges you to actually try and put all this information in a way that people can digest it. So yeah, so I'm glad it's working somewhat.
Yeah, so Karl, you're kind of unique in having worked in Europe a bit too, and all that experience. It's something I remember I used to kind of think, oh, the Europeans are always a little bit ahead of us, but they did have like a 2,000-year head start.
Well, the Native Americans might argue with you about that.
I'm just wondering things maybe you could share with us, the difference between us and them in their approach or in their funding, or is there something we can learn from that, or is it just time?
Yeah, I mean, because in Europe, especially in Switzerland, they just put a lot more money into avalanches because there's a large portion of their country that is living in the mountains and affected by avalanches, so there's just a lot more money that goes into avalanches, a lot more research and stuff like that. I think, they've been able to really attack a lot of these questions at a high technical level with a lot of great scientists and whatnot. It's interesting because you go over to Switzerland and there is good, it's in the same building are the avalanche forecasters and all the scientists are in the same complex there. And there's good communication there, but it hasn't always been that way. Like it's gotten a lot better recently. And so it was interesting to me at first, like seeing what a disconnect there was between all this great science and then some of the practitioner work, and they just had a hard time communicating. But I think that's gotten a lot better. I will share one, well, you guys might find it somewhat entertaining story about being in Switzerland. And I went over there for a fellowship, and of course it was the COVID year, so I got chased home by COVID. But before all that happened, we were doing this research on these concrete bunkers, which was awesome because they were like a 5-minute drive from SLF, and you'd go up there and then you'd go up on these bunkers with a ladder, and there's perfectly flat and down in a creek bottom, so surface hoar would always form, and then it would snow, and you'd have these beautiful layers to work with and stuff. And I kept telling people, I told these guys, I said, hey, like we need to build like I'm like, where can I find some cardboard? I just want to build like another frame, like what I use, what we were talking about before, where we'd load up the snowpack and stuff with a cardboard frame. And they're like, we don't do that here. Like, we're not going to make something out of cardboard. And they're like, we have a whole machine shop where they work on stuff, and I'm like, okay, I want a box that looks like this. And And then one person went and they found this really good material, and it was like this plastic honeycomb material, you know, that was stiffer and it wasn't going to stick and stuff. And they're like, yeah, we're going to build a box out of this. And I was like, that's great, you know. And they're like, oh, but it's the weekend and those guys are off. And I was going, but it's snowing right now and we have the week layer, right? So we need the box now. And they're like, yeah, the box will be ready like hopefully next Wednesday, but maybe next Friday. And so I went downstairs and I talked to a person. I'm like, where do you guys keep your recycling? And they're like, oh, it's over in this one area, you know. And I go there and it's like this cramped little corner. And so I open this thing up and I crawl into this little crawl space, and there's all these pieces of cardboard, you know, and I'm throwing them out. And then I get out and I stand up, and Perry Bartelt, who does a lot of the avalanche flow dynamics work there, and he's been there forever. And Perry just looks at me and he goes, Karl, what in the world are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to get this cardboard. I'm going to build it. He's like, we don't do that this way, you know? And I just said, it's just for this weekend. As soon as they build the other box, I'll be fine, you know? But it was just hilarious. He was like, I've never seen someone digging through our cardboard supply for their work. So.
Hey, Karl, I've
Yeah.
always admired your work with cardboard. I just want to say that.
Yeah, well, you know.
Some fine cardboard work. And, I think filing.
Yeah,
cardboard,
yeah, yeah.
all kinds of cardboard.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm an artist.
Cardboard and duct tape. Yeah.
I've always been interested, and I've thought about it with you, Ed, too. You're also a skier and a backcountry skier, and you're out skiing in the mountains and presumably taking risk and skiing powder. And I think about the professional and the backcountry enthusiast and where those things intersect. And I'm just wondering if you can speak at all to decision making and how far outside of the scientific day job you are when you're out recreating in the mountains, and if you can speak to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like when you're out recreating and to a certain extent when you're ski patrolling, you're utilizing some of that science, right? But you're kind of outside that science box a lot, because you're relying a lot more on, you know, just your general observations, your understanding of the snowpack, your things like that. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I think the main thing for going to the mountains is you just go there with, like I always told my kids when I take them out in the mountains, you go with confidence and humility, right? So I mean, you need to have some kind of confidence or you're never going to go, but you also need to have humility, and you need to just not really get that worried about turning around. And so one of the fun things about going out in the mountains with my kids has been that, you know, since they were young, they learned that like it was okay to turn around, you know, and we'd go up somewhere and we'd dig a pit and we'd go, huh, you know, we would have walked in for like 6 miles with skis on our backs and climbed up this thing, and we're like, well, today's not the day, you know? So, but, you know, as we all know, like you can try and trim your risk down as small as you possibly can, but there's still a certain amount of residual risk, and it's not like it's not like I've never been surprised in the mountains. It's like all of us have, right?
You ever been caught in an avalanche?
Oh yeah. I've been caught in a couple avalanches. The first time I got caught in an avalanche, I think it was the time that it was the biggest surprise to me. And that was actually in the side country outside of Snow Basin. And, you know, I think I'd been patrolling, you know, by that time I'd been patrolling for like 5 years maybe, but 2 years, just 2 years at Snow Basin. And we were skiing the side country area, and we went down and we dug a pit. And in the early 1980s, you were like, you dug a pit and you looked at the snow, and the snow was either stable or it wasn't. Like, people didn't really still grasp the importance of spatial variability. I mean, you sort of did generally, but like a lot of times people spent a lot of time in that one little pit, you know, and we dug our pit and did a quick test, and we're like, oh yeah, it's really good. Well, we're up high in an area where there's a lot of snow, and then we ski down, and then we got to a certain area, and then I kept skiing, and I skied out of sight of my partners. Mistake number one. And then I skied down into this gully, and I went up onto the sort of, as I was skiing down the gully, I went up onto like a little rib, and then I parked underneath a tree. Mistake number two. You don't go out of sight of your partners, and when you park next to a tree, you park above it. And so while I was kick turning my 210s around, the whole thing goes whoomph, because at the top, you know, we had like over 200, 250 centimeters of snow, and where we were right there, there was a meter of snow, and the bottom 25 centimeters was depth hoar. Thing goes thump. By the time I get my other ski around, we're going. Luckily, I was up near the top of it, but no one has eyes on. Like, I'm down there, and I managed to just sort of, I remember keep thinking, I just got to work my way to the edge of this thing. So I'm kind of riding it and standing up and pushing and getting bumped over. But luckily I didn't have a whole bunch of snow above me. And as I was getting pushed into this gully, I got my skis right to the outside of the avalanche. And then they just caught the non-moving snow and just out I went, you know. But so that was a real wake-up call in terms of how much the snow, having systems in place, like what Dave was talking about, and how much the snow varies and how fast it varies. So yeah, and then a couple other times I've been caught in avalanches. They were small, and they were just stupid things. They were, you know, I mean, I knew the snow was super unstable. I was working my way down through a bunch of terrain. I knew the snow was really unstable, but hey, I was going to go collect information for the avalanche advisory. And I mean, I crossed a little, it was all thick trees, except I crossed a little thing that was about as wide as this right here. And I stood on the edge of it, and I went, I think I'm good. And I told my partner, I'm like, hey, look at me. And he looked at me, and there was a tree like right where Mike was. And I took like steps, and my skis sunk in, and it went whoomp. And I jumped over, wrapped my arms around the tree, and I realized that if you have skis on your feet, boy, you better have a really strong grip, because it ripped me off the tree so fast. I didn't even realize. I was like, I must have missed the tree. But then later, like, I had these huge abrasions on both arms, all up and down both arms, because I had apparently grabbed a hold of the tree pretty good. But yeah, so, you know, just a few stupid little things like that. But I was just lucky that they weren't, you know, that they weren't worse.
What was Ethan like as an intern?
Oh boy, how much time do we have? No, you know what happened with Ethan was I got asked to teach a class up at MSU for it was like their weather and climate class that my old advisor Kathy Hansen was teaching, and she's like, come talk about avalanches for the day. And I'm like, okay. So I went up there, talked about avalanches, and this kid comes up afterwards, and he's like, I want to do that. And I was like, sounds good. He's like, how can I learn? I said, well, like, I just started this avalanche center, and I need some help. Like, you can be my intern this year. And he's like, I'm in. And that was Ethan. And we figured out that, you know, we went to the same high school 7 years apart. We lived like, you know, his uncle, Tom, was actually a really good friend of my dad's from years ago. And yeah, so.
What I'd like to know, out of all the research you've done, you know, master's, PhD, you've been doing research like crazy, is there one like, what do you think is your most valuable piece of research?
Oh, well, I mean, it'd be hard to argue that developing the extended column test with Ron Simonhoys isn't probably the most important. And just in terms of like how widely used that is and stuff like that would have to be a big one. I mean, some of the research that I did, it was just ideas that were floating around the patrol room before I ever went to graduate school. You know, like the near surface faceting thing was fascinating to me, because when I was down in Utah, everyone was talking about near surface faceting, and there's this guy who was on the Snowbird snow safety, John Stratton, and he had documented like the formation of these faceted crystals in the surface of the snow. And so, but no one really knew why or how they were created or what was going on. And so we started looking at them at Snow Basin and seeing avalanches happen on them, and we were like, wow, yeah, of course, you know. And then I came up here and I said, yeah, there's these layers that form, and everyone's like, yeah, I don't think they form up here. And I'm like, oh, you know, and I pull out my lens and I'd go, yeah, see, you know, and they're like, oh, I never saw a lens like that before. Wow, those look pretty, you know, and so it was just really funny. And I thought, well, you know, I mean, more people know about this than we do, right? And there's going to be, like, people must have written a bunch of papers and stuff. And so I started looking at stuff, and then like the 1993 Avalanche Handbook came out, and there was nothing about it in there. And I thought, wow, like maybe people, and then I started looking at stuff, and I was like, wow, people really haven't looked at this. So, you know, that was kind of fun. Then made a bunch of measurements with Scott Schmidt and with Ron Johnson, and looked at a bunch of crystals over the years, and we're like, wow, a lot of avalanches are happening on these, and this is how they form. And so, yeah, that was pretty fun. Yeah.
Karl, can you speak to like having a long career and how to manage that? Just because like forecasting is so immersive, and then interesting what you mentioned. I find like there's a switch where I'm no longer at higher risk like skiing for fun.
Mm-hmm.
I'm at higher risk looking for data.
Yeah.
Like way higher. I'll expose myself to way higher risk, just like hungry for some information for the center. And that's
Yeah, I think that's something we all have to really be careful of, because, you know, that's essentially what got me caught in that one avalanche. Was I was like pretty convinced that there were going to be avalanches. So what was I doing walking around where I was walking? I mean, I was reducing my uncertainty. I definitely found that there was avalanches, you know, but like things could have ended badly. I mean, it was a small avalanche, but it flushed me into this little bowl. And as I was getting flushed into the bowl, I thought, if this collapses the snow here, and if this takes out this bowl, like, I am screwed, you know. And it didn't. I went down and scooted off to the side. But yeah, I think you know, I think especially when we're working forecasting in the backcountry, it can be really dangerous. And I think it's incumbent on everybody that's doing that work to take those 3 or 4 steps back, and also to make sure that they have all these safety nets, these systems in place to, you know, in case things do go wrong. Because, you know, one bad accident at a Forest Service forecast center could adversely affect the whole program quite a lot, you know. And so if you start thinking of it that way, I think maybe it helps. But yeah, I think, you know, I think in some ways having a long career is luck in a little bit, because what happens is you sort of, you know, you take a little bit more risk, and then you get slammed down, and then you take risk and you get slammed down, and pretty soon you just don't want to take any risk anymore. You're kind of floating around down here. And so you just got to make sure that, yeah, these little corrections aren't fatal.
I have to say that, you know, in your career, one of the things that stands out for me in terms of the best research, the most helpful research you've ever done was when you found out that we don't have to get onto avalanche terrain to get good data. That a 30-degree slope or a 25-degree slope for stability tests they're the same, or damn close to being the same as they would be on a 37. Because early in my career, I just know I was always going out on steep slopes, to get data, because that's what you did. You had to get on there. If you know there, go there.
Yep.
And then we found out that actually you don't have to do that anymore. I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of nice.
Yeah. And that was an interesting one because, we were changing from a paradigm of just thinking about avalanches in terms of shear fractures to avalanches in terms of there being a collapse, which, this scientists will call it an anti-crack, but a collapse that then drives that crack forward. And one of the researchers that was doing that work, I had a discussion with him, and he said, because he had these different graphs in his talk, and I said, it looks like what you're saying is that we should be able to do our stability tests in flat terrain. And he said, yep, you should. They should be fine. And I thought, yeah, I don't think so. So we just decided, well, we'll do the ECTs and CTs on varying slope angles. And so the first day that I went out and collected those data was down in Lionhead, and we had a nice surface hoar layer with 30 or 40 centimeters of snow on it, and we were getting ECTs that were propagating at they were all 12 to 14, every single one, from 7 degrees over to 34 degrees or something, or 33, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, I collected all this data, and I was like, that just doesn't seem right. And so I actually, I came home, looked at the data for a day, and then I went back the following day to repeat everything right nearby, because I was in an area where it doesn't get a lot of wind and the slope just kind of gently goes off, so you could get flat and just keep on going downhill to steeper and steeper. And the data were the same again. And it's kind of interesting because some of the modelers in Europe who are doing the most sophisticated modeling, they are still pretty sure that things should be easier to trigger on steep terrain because you have not only compression working in your favor, but you also have a shear component. And steeper you get, you have more of that shear component. And I said, well, our measurements aren't showing that. And they said they think that's a convenient artifact of the geometries of the test and how your geometry of your test changes as you go into steeper terrain. And, because now instead of having this flat weak layer, the weak layer is propped up a little bit, and the area of the weak layer compared, they said, I think it's geometrical, but we still don't have a good answer for why. But definitely, I mean, I wouldn't say, hey, let's all go to 5-degree slopes, but we can certainly go to 25-degree slopes and get perfectly good data.
He left out a pretty critical piece of the story, which is on the second day I was with him.
Oh, yeah.
And
that's right.
It's we're doing ECTs, and it's it was low, it was probably 10 or 11 or something. It's ECT 11, 11, 11. I mean, we're doing a ton of these, and we're just marching our way down the hill, and we're just man, this snow sucks. It is just it is so unstable, and we're psyched that we didn't collapse it. We were worried about getting a whoomph and collapsing the weak layer, and we didn't. It's 11. It's oh my God, it's.
And I kept measuring 11, the slope angle.
11, and we're getting steeper and steeper, and then we trigger the slope.
And I remember right before we triggered it, I measured the slope angle, and I was like, we're at 32 degrees. We can't go any farther than this. And we took that couple of steps to get to do that one thing, and then it went whoomp, and it actually triggered the slope down below us. Yeah. So, there, see, Gabrielle, in search of the data.
That's right.
All right. No.
Any other?
Eric, yeah.
So Carl, you've seen a lot of changes, like, from the time when forecasting was, write it in Word, write it on the whatever computer you were writing on, and then record it on the phone.
Yep.
And like that's how you would get your info to to YouTube videos, to the conceptual model, and like all remote sensing, all these things. What's your prediction of AI taking over avalanche forecasting?
Geez, well, it seems like Ethan's already got that one rolling. Oh yeah, no, Ethan punched a bunch of stuff into AI, and it made a forecast for him. So.
Grammatically correct and everything.
Yeah, which is different than if Ethan had actually written the forecast. But
You've seen all these changes, and I missed Ethan's talk, unfortunately. Do you have a prediction or like a vision of where forecasting?
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've always sort of said that I thought that that there's still going to be this role for the forecaster. Like, I think it's going to be really hard not to have a human being that's assessing all the data that's coming in. But what's happening is we're just getting more and better data, right? Like, we're getting, and when Ethan talked this morning and some of the other talks, like, we're just getting more tools. When Alex was talking about the work that he's doing with the folks in Norway, and like flying a drone around and getting a LiDAR scan of a specific slope, and like what if you were getting LiDAR scans of your entire forecast area or of your entire ski area with a fixed wing drone or whatever, and that's happening at 5 a.m. That shows up on the snow safety's desk, and they can look at exactly how much snow fell on what part of the mountain and where it's wind deposited and where it's not. I mean, so there's these different tools, and the computing power, of course. And so I think you can actually, and I saw this in Switzerland too, is that their forecasting team was 8 people, and they have, I think it's 7 full-time programmers that their entire job 100% of the time is building tools for the forecasting team. So they have as many programmers as they have forecasters, and they have some amazing tools, ways to assimilate all this data that's coming in. And so I think there's some neat work to be done there, but at the end of the day, you're still going to need, until things get a lot better, I think you're still going to need a person to sift through it. Yeah.
Do you find that with all those tools and all that resource, are they any better at forecasting avalanches than anywhere else?
Well, I did go out on a day when it was low and got caught in an avalanche there. That was the most recent avalanche I got caught in.
What does that say about their forecast?
I know. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, they had all these tools, and yet, yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, there's been a lot of give and take with the Swiss over the years, because they built all these tools. They've had like the snowpack model. They've had this, that, and the other thing. And then a lot of times they build these tools, and then they hand them to the forecasters, and they say, hey, the tool's operational. Like, people are using it operationally. And then what I would always do is I would go talk to the forecasters and say, so, like, tell me how you like this tool. And they'd be like, oh, we don't look at that. We look at this stuff. And so it's been a long time coming. Now the forecasters are actually starting to use, like, the tools have come a long ways, and the forecasters are starting to use those tools the way they were intended in the beginning. But it's taken a long time to, like, get them to that spot. So I don't know that the forecasting is necessarily better. I don't know. I mean, when you ask the forecasters there, how good are your forecasts? They say, well, they're really good around Davos, because they're all based in Davos, and that's where they do their field work. But they also, they get all this really good data from all these professional observers. But even even that way, they feel like the farther they get away from Davos, they have a harder time putting out good forecasts. So, yeah. Right on.
You're free.
And you guys are free to go get beer.
So